Welcome, everybody, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. This is Fantasy Rain Rundown, the weekly off-season podcast show here on the Let Purple Rain podcast. My name is Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008. After stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can find all of my content on letpurplerain.com. You can also follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. You can really help out the new Spotify channel, help it grow by leaving a 5-star review. And you can follow me on X at UW underscore purple underscore rain. That is spelled REIGN. And today, we're going to start today's show with a short recap of last week's content. And then we'll move over to our topic of the day, which is my wide receiver and tight end draft trends. And then it'll be mailbag time, which will be pretty quick here. We got one question for today, and then we'll wrap up this fast-paced podcast episode. Now that that's out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. Last week, we posted 2 items at letpurplerain.com. We had a Diary of a Draft Man episode for the Tadpole Bowl mock draft number 2 that I hosted. And I also put out an article of overvalued and undervalued players. For the Diary of a Draft Man episode, we went through and did a mock draft for the Scott Fish Tadpole Bowl. And I used my Power 4 Tadpole Bowl draft strategy in that one. I did some variations from the base strategy that I have included in my draft guide. In the first 5 rounds, I decided to avoid quarterback, and I went a little heavy on wide receiver. So for this one, the free portion of the show, which was on YouTube, I drafted 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers. In those first 5 picks, I drafted running back Dylan Edwards from Kansas State, wide receiver Eric McAllister, TCU, running back Trey Wisner, Texas, wide receiver Dane Key, Nebraska, and wide receiver Decorium Moore out of Oregon. For the other article, the main article of last week, by the way, I highlighted players that I find as being over and undervalued based on a comparison of my draft guide rankings and the current ADP. I pulled some of those names here that we're going to be reviewing. And I didn't include everyone from the article, but these are some names I thought people might find interesting. For the 3 quarterbacks I pulled, I have Matthew Sluka, who in my draft guide, I have him pushed down the rankings at quarterback 42, mainly because we don't know a whole lot of what's going on with the quarterback competition yet. But ADP-wise, he's being drafted as quarterback 17. Quarterback Brandon Lewis out of Memphis is one of my favorite kind of sleeper guys. I have him ranked as quarterback 31, and you can find him as a steal. With ADP, he's being taken as the quarterback 61. And another favorite kind of sleeper guy of mine is quarterback Dwayne Coleman, Army. I have him ranked as quarterback 41, but you can get him in ADP as quarterback 63. Moving on to some running backs here. I have Quentin Joyner from Texas Tech and Jaden Baugh from Florida. These are 2 guys that I feel like are being overvalued. Joyner, I have him ranked at running back 35, but he's being drafted as a running back 13. Jaden Baugh from Florida, I have him ranked all the way down at running back 102, and he's being drafted as the running back 55. 2 undervalued running backs that I like is Javon Ducker from Temple. I have him ranked running back 30, and he's being drafted as running back 152. And Shamori Lawrence from Missouri State. I have him ranked as running back 58, and he's currently going in ADP as running back 106. Moving on to wide receivers, 2 guys that I find as being overvalued is Pafoi Ashlock out of Hawaii. I have him ranked wide receiver 30, and he's going as the number 11 wide receiver. And then Xavier Townsend, the transfer over at Iowa State. I'm going to admit my ranking's a bit low here at 197. But, he's being drafted at 93. I still think that's a pretty big gap. He is a hot name. I think you could argue if you're drafting the 93rd wide receiver, like you're taking a dart throw, it's okay. But I still just wanted to include his name because I know there are people interested in him. And then 2 undervalued guys. One guy who I think is really going to be a steal this year is Josh Cameron out of Baylor. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 8, and he's currently going as wide receiver 39. And Micah Mays out of Wake Forest is another guy I like. I have him at number 34 in my rankings. but he is going as a wide receiver 69. And then looking over at the tight end position, uh, Sido Traor, might not be saying it correctly, out of Mississippi State. He's been a popular name, being drafted as the tight end 24, but I've got him ranked all the way down at tight end 49. And then got another Temple guy on here, another kind of sleeper guy that I like, and I've taken some shots on. We'll go over him today. Ryder Cush from Temple. I have him ranked as a tight end 24, and he's going as a tight end 40, which is pretty good value here. Going to switch things over now to my draft trends that we've seen, and we'll start with the wide receiver position. And I'm going to start by covering all FBS drafts. I do break this down by all FBS and Power 4 only drafts. And got a couple of guys here just going down the list, give you an idea of who I've been drafting and about where I've been drafting them at. You do see on the screen it says draft percentage. That's a percentage of fantasy mock drafts that I've done where I've taken that particular player. And I'll start it off with Ryan Williams at Alabama. I've drafted him 50% of the time at an average ADP of 110. And that ADP, for anyone looking, that is the round, dot, and then the selection. So 110 would be first round, 10th pick. Next guy on the list here, Chase Sowell from Iowa State. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 212 spot. Caden Lee from Ole Miss. I've drafted 50% of the time at an average of the 6-3 spot. Josh Cameron, a guy who I mentioned I really do like. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 7-1 spot. Chris Bell from Louisville. You can tell I like him. I've drafted him 100% of the time, and I've gotten him in the 8th round with the 8th pick. Jaleel Farouk from Maryland. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 14-12 spot. Quayshawn Brown out of Duke. I have drafted him 100% of the time. I'm a big fan of him as a sleeper, and I've drafted him at the 16-5 spot on average. Final guy on the list here, Matthew Henry, 50% of the time at 1803. And as you kind of look at those ADPs, you'll notice every now and then I'm going to take a shot. If it's late, actually, I should say if I'm drafting around the curve. So like a lot of times I'll take a shot on a wide receiver, especially with Ryan Williams here in that first round, and then Chase was someone I took in the late second round. I'm going to look for someone early on, and you see that with those two before you kind of see that there's a wait, and then that round 6, 7, 8 area where you see Caden Lee, Josh Cameron, Chris Bell. That's where I'm looking to pick up another wide receiver. And then once again, I'm waiting. I'm probably going after running backs, quarterbacks, and maybe a tight end at that point before you see with Farouk, Brown, and Henry, those last three guys I mentioned. I took them 14th, 16th, 18th, so I'm kind of starting to nibble away once you get to the middle teen rounds. And the second half of this all FBS group that I'm going to review, I have Jamison Tucker out of Coastal Carolina. I have drafted him 100% of the time on an average of the 18-8 spot. Noah Rogers, I've drafted him 100% of the time at the 22-5 area. Quavez Humphreys out of Sam Houston State. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 22-12 spot. Chris Don, I've drafted 50% of the time at an average of 26-3. Jalen Lloyd, Oklahoma State. I was surprised that I've only drafted him 50% of the time, but I've gotten him around the 28-12 spot. Kevin Green is another guy I really like from Washington. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 29-1 spot. Carl Chester from Southern Miss, a guy I planted my flag on to be the explosive outside wide receiver 1 at Southern Miss. I've drafted him half of the time in the 29th round. And then PJ Johnson rounds out this list 50% of the time at the 33 spot. That's 30.03. And where you kind of notice that, like I mentioned, from the last graphic I had in, for those of you that are on YouTube, I was kind of grabbing guys at 14th, 16th, 18th round, and then I wait. I'm kind of wrapping up my quarterbacks and running backs before I start getting into the 20s. I only have two guys here in the 22 rounds, but then what you're kind of seeing is once round 25 hits, that's when I'm really looking at rounding out my wide receivers. I think there's a lot of good value there. And with this group with Chris Don, Jalen Lloyd, Kevin Green, Carl Chester, and PJ Johnson, I drafted all those guys in the 26th round or later. Switching over to my Power 4 wide receivers. And I will say I've done a lot more Power 4 drafts lately than I have done the all FBS, mainly because the Tadpole Bowl was coming up. Wanted to make sure I'm providing a lot of Tadpole Bowl mocks for you guys, as well as just getting myself ready, which I'm still in that Tadpole Bowl draft, slow draft, which is going online. And I think I've gotten 16 picks in of the 25 over almost a week's time. So that one's moving a little slow here. But talking about these Power Four drafts that I've drafted Cam Coleman out of Auburn 50% of the time at an average of the 110 spot. Eric McAllister out of TCU, I've drafted him 50% of the time out of the 2-4 spot. Caden Lee from Ole Miss makes a return on here. I've drafted him 50% of the time at the 4-5 spot. Decorium Moore is someone I got a little aggressive with toward the end, and I ended up drafting him in my Tadpole Bowl draft. Decorium Moore from Oregon, I've drafted him for these stats 25% of the time at the 5-5 spot. I mentioned that I drafted him in my Tadpole Bowl league. I have not included my Tadpole Bowl in this my mock draft tracking just because it's not done yet, and it would kind of skew some of the later picks. So I've left that out. That's why you see Decorium Moore is only 25% of the time. Dane Key from Nebraska. I've drafted him 75% of the time, one of the largest shares of any wide receiver for the Power 5 group. And I've, on average, gotten him at the 6-2 spot. Joseph Williams from Colorado. I've taken a risk on him one time, which is at the 8th round, started the 8th round. And that was more of a mock draft where I'm just shooting for ceiling and upside and not taking on as much risk. That's the reason I've only drafted him once. Quayshawn Brown from Duke is on here again. I've drafted him 50% of the time in Power 4 drafts at an average of the 12-5 spot. Micah Mays, Wake Forest. I've drafted him half the time at the 14-4 spot. And Anthony Evans from Mississippi State. I've drafted him 25% of the time at the 15-5 area. Kenny Johnson from Pitt. I've taken a shot on him 25% of the time at an average of the 16-1 spot. And then Deuce Robinson from Florida State. I've taken a shot at him 25% of the time at the 16-2 spot. And when looking at these ADP trends, you're seeing, once again, like I've got one or two guys that are popping off in the first or second round. Then I'm waiting a little bit. And then that next batch of rounds comes in from rounds 4 through 8. I'm picking up other wide receivers. Then I'm waiting for a while. And then I start coming back in the teens, where I started here in the 12th round. And then I'm kind of picking up guys all the way through the 16th round. This next batch of guys, you're going to see a couple more from the end of the teens here, starting out with Kevin Green from Washington. I've drafted him 25% of the time at the 17-5 spot. Javon Tracy from Minnesota, drafted him 25% of the time in the 18-1 area. Noah Rogers from North Carolina. I've drafted him a lot in these Power 4 drafts. Drafted him 75% of the time in the 19-7 spot. And Noah, one reason I've gone after Noah a lot is I do like doing a stack with these NC State guys. So I kind of feel that that's a good late round value, and I think both of them could have a pretty high ceiling. Where their floor is, I think, is up for debate. It could be low, so it is a little more of a risk shot. But taking that risk for high upside and getting a quarterback wide receiver stack, I've really been leaning into that quite a bit in my Power 4 drafts. Jalen Lloyd out of Oklahoma State. I've drafted him 100% of the time in my Power 4 drafts on an average of the 12-7 spot. DT Sheffield from Rutgers, who I'm kind of leaning toward maybe being the wide receiver one, playing in the slot and really kind of leaning on system there over an individual guy. I've taken him 25% of the time at an average of the 22-8. Trell Harris from Virginia. I've taken him 25% of the time for the 24-02 spot. Now I have a pair of Miami wide receivers. In one draft, I decided to try and handcuff that room. And in that draft, I took Malachi Tony and Tony Johnson. And I took them back to back in the 24th and 25th rounds. Christian Fitzpatrick. He is not in Fantrax, folks. But I think he's a steal. Someone that would be worth using a placeholder for out of Oklahoma State. He transferred in there, has an opportunity, could be the wide receiver, the top outside wide receiver there. I've taken him one time, and I took him in the 27-5 spot, so definitely worth the dart throw. And another dart throw guy I like, I kind of would like to get more shares of him, is Dallas Wilson out of Florida. I've taken him 25% of the time in the that one draft. I took him in the 30th round. If I switch over now to wrap up this, we're going to go into the tight ends for my all FBS drafts. My top guy has been Matthew Louder out of Boise State. I've drafted him 50% of the time at an average of the 11-1 spot. Jack Velling from Michigan State, a good steady Eddie guy. Maybe not the highest ceiling, but definitely a good floor you can rely on. I've leaned on him in half of my drafts, and I've gotten him on average at the 12-3 spot. Michael Trigg, I've taken Michael Trigg from Baylor. Excuse me, I've taken 50% of the time at the 24-3 spot. And Trigg's a guy I've started getting a little colder on, but I kind of was taking him as like it's a lower floor play, but just a guy that he's in a good offense. We just don't know how many balls will get to him, how many touchdowns he might get, but kind of I drafted him with the attitude of a steady Eddie. I do think that there might be some other guys out there. Another guy that I really do like, Ryder Cush. I mentioned him out of Temple earlier. I've drafted him half the time in the 25-1 spot. And then DeAndre Rogers, Kamorian, Pimpton. I've been drafting Pipton the most. Both these guys are tight ends out of TCU. I've drafted Pipton 100% of the time, and on average of the 27-5 spot. And then Rogers, to do a handcuff of that tight end room, I've drafted him half the time at the 27-1 spot. And wrapping up this all FBS with tight ends is Olson Pat Henry out of Clemson. I've drafted him half the time at the 28-3 spot. When you look at these rounds that I'm going at, I'm trying to get myself a good, reliable tight end one, and I'm doing it in the early teen rounds. Here I did it in the 11th and the 12th round. And then the rest of these guys, I'm waiting until about the last 5 to 6 rounds of a draft and just taking my shots on guys. So with Trigg, Cush, Rogers, Pipton, Henry, all of those picks are made from the 24th through the 28th round. For my Power 4 drafts, I have a lot more guys here for those of you on YouTube that can see my graphics. For those of you listening, probably about twice as many tight ends. Once again, I've been doing more Power 4 drafts, and a lot of these are spread out. The percentages are lower on these tight ends compared to my all FBS, as I've done some different strategies. So that's why I've got a larger group here, but Jack Velling hits the top of the list from Michigan State. I drafted him 25% of the time, and reaching up all the way to the 8 spot, typically reacting to tight end runs that start early, and getting Velling over some of these other guys that are lower on this list is because the tight end run went really quick, and by the time it got around to me, some of these other guys were already gone. One of those guys is Joe Royer out of Cincinnati, a guy I really like. I drafted him 25% of the time in the 10th round, and Jack Endries out of Texas, the new transfer. He is the only guy that I've drafted more than 25% of the time. I've taken him in half of my Power 4 drafts, and that's when I can get him. If I don't have to reach too high, or if he's not taken too early, I'd take him 100% of the time. But I've taken him in half my drafts on average in the 11-8 spot. Elijah Lofton out of Miami. And actually, I want to say every tight end that I'm going to go through here remaining, I've taken them all 25% of the time. So I'll skip reviewing that here as I go through the names. But Elijah Lofton out of Miami, I've drafted him on average in the 11-12 spot. Luke Reynolds out of Penn State, I've taken him in the 13-5 spot. Dorian Fleming out of Maryland, I'm surprised I've only taken him 25% of the time. But I got him in the 15-5 spot, and I did make sure to snag him up for my Tadpole Bowl draft. Olson Pat Henry out of Clemson makes the list again. I got him in the 20.01 spot. Daquan Wright out of Ole Miss. I've been leaning on him over Haas as the top tight end, but I see them really as tight end 1A, 1B in that Ole Miss offense. Taking Wright on average in the 21-11 spot. Sidhu Traore out of Mississippi State. I mentioned when I was going over the overvalued players, I think he is overvalued. I've taken him only once in a mock draft. And the reason I took him was that I already had a quarterback and a wide receiver for Mississippi State in that draft. Traore was my last tight end taken, and I just decided to get another stack with that Mississippi State offense. So the value that made me drive to get Traore and get him in the 22-8 spot was to create yet another stack with one of my backup quarterbacks. And then rounding out this group are the TCU handcuffs here at tight end, Pipton and Rogers. And I took those guys back to back in the 25th and 26th round. And you're kind of seeing a similar trend I mentioned before. I'm reacting to the tight end runs. The Jack Velling in the 8th round is really me reacting to a way too early tight end run in a mock draft. But everybody else I've got between rounds 10 through 15. So somewhere in there, I'm looking to get that first tight end, and I might strike and grab someone like a Dorian Fleming, a Luke Reynolds, even Elijah Lofton. Like I might look at trying to grab a second tight end and be aggressive. In my Tadpole Bowl draft, I did exactly that. I don't remember the exact rounds off the top of my head, but I took two tight ends. I was drafting the very last spot in the 12th spot. So I just went bang, bang. Tight ends were starting to go, and I knew they would continue. And since I had such a long wait, I just took two tight ends, had no bye week overlaps, and just set myself up with two really good, reliable guys. And then once you get through those early teen rounds, or through the 10th through 15th rounds, then I'm waiting until about those last 5, maybe 6 rounds to round out that tight end group. So that wraps up our main topic here. I mentioned for mailbag time, this is going to be a short one. And for all of you that are new, your first time maybe listening or watching the show, mailbag time is the portion of the show where I answer your submitted questions. You can submit questions to me on X or through the Substack chat feature. I put out calls every week running typically Tuesday through Friday. If anybody has questions, you can throw your questions in those chats that I set up on X and on Substack. You can ask me questions about really anything, guys. It does not even have to be football related. Think of it as an AMA. Ask me anything. I'm here for you guys. Even if the questions are kind of silly, I'm cool with that. Just looking over at our time, we're doing pretty good. We'll probably wrap up a little early here instead of that roughly 30-minute mark that I like to try and keep these fast-paced shows at. So the one question that I have is from Jeff Thyme. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Jay Thyme on Substack. He asked, what are my thoughts on Deuce Adams versus Miller Moss at Louisville? Who will be the quarterback one? And I see this job as Moss's this year. I think Deuce is the more talented player, but my gut tells me that this is going to be a learning year for him. I could see Deuce get out on the field if Moss starts throwing too many interceptions. So they're probably going to be prepping him as a guy that might play, or maybe even they come up with some Wildcat packages for all we know. It's not a typical thing we see out of that offense, but I think they're going to have to find a way to keep Deuce satisfied where he doesn't want to transfer out as he's in that quarterback 2 role. But I really think this is just Moss's job to lose this year. Moss gives you that safe guy who has more playing time, fits what this offense likes to do. Deuce, you may have, they'll have to add packages into this offense that they just normally don't run in the system. I think Deuce is definitely that, like if you're doing a Devy or you're maybe doing like a campus to Canton, Deuce is definitely a guy to go after. But if you're just doing best ball, redraft league, I would just bet my money on Moss. And I don't think there's enough fantasy value, let's say in a redraft league or a best ball, that it's worth handcuffing these two in this quarterback room. I just think take the shot on Moss. Deuce is a guy, if he plays this year, it's because Moss got injured or Moss is screwing up too much. I just can't bank on Deuce winning the job outright because I think he'll have too many mental errors, which will be what holds him back from winning this. All right, guys, so I'm going to wrap up the show here since I had that one question. Hope that you guys like the answer there, at least my insights on it. But going through some announcements, next week at letpurplerain.com, I will be releasing a Diary of a Draftman episode for the Chasing the Natty mock draft number 6. I'll be joining an all FBS draft, and I'll be giving you guys my thought process as I draft my team. These are great episodes where I am giving you an insight to my mind and talking out the decision-making process as I go. I'm also starting a brand new article series called Player Prop Spotlight. This is where I will highlight different player prop bets and I provide my analysis on them. The first article in this series will be coming out next week, and it will be covering the Underdog Fantasy preseason props. Also, I have out my 2025 CFF Draft Guide. All premium subscribers get this package for free. So it's one of the added values I give you guys for being a premium subscriber, whether you guys sign up for the monthly subscription or if you take the massive discount that I give on an annual subscription. $50 gets you all of my content all year long, including this draft guide. If you are not a premium subscriber and don't wish to sign up to be one, I have plenty of free subscribers, and I enjoy having every one of you with me. It is $15 for purchase. There's a link in the article on my website that it will take you to where you can go and purchase this whole package. Um, it has 76 pages of CFF info in the draft guide. I provide player rankings for all FBS, Power 4. In Power 4, I do half PPR is my standard scoring. So I've got the standard half PPR. I have underdog fantasy rankings. I have Scott Fish Tadpole Bowl rankings. And I also do group of 5 rankings for you as well. And for all of your fan tracks leagues, I provide you upload files where you can take my player rankings and automatically upload them into your fan tracks leagues to help make everything extremely simple for you guys. And I also provide my player projections. I have 974 players listed out in my projections. This whole guide, I really think, is the next big thing in CFF draft guides. And excuse me, little quick on the finger there. I want to say this was the Fantasy Rain Rundown. Please follow on YouTube and Spotify. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF Rain starts here.